Hey everybody, good afternoon. It's Dr. Karen, and today I'm going to just take a few minutes to answer a question that's been coming up a lot on some of my conversations with graduate students who are currently working on either a thesis or a dissertation. However, this question comes up more often when it's related specifically to a dissertation, and that question is, what chapter should I write first? And a lot of times a committee will have a preference, or your department will have a preference as to how they want you to do it. And then oftentimes there's even sometimes in certain programs, they might have a specific course that's focused on chapter 1. And then the next course will teach you how to write chapters 2 and 3. And some universities will structure that for you, but a lot of times they will just have you register for dissertation hours and then just have you structure it on your own, collaboratively with your chair. And as you know, the amount of support that you get from your chair varies highly depending on who your chair is, what university you're at, if you're on campus or not, if you're attending a brick and mortar university versus an online school, and so on. So the challenge that comes up with a lot of people is that they don't have a plan of attack, seeing as how this is a massive project that can potentially be finished in a year, but a lot of times goes on a little bit longer than that. And for a lot of people, sometimes I've even talked to people who have been ABD for a couple years or have been stuck at the same stage for over a year. So if you have been stuck at one stage, whether it be one chapter, whether it be you're stuck at the proposal, whether it be that you've had your data for over a year, that is kind of a red flag that you need to do something. It's not that it doesn't happen, but unfortunately, as you know, a lot of people do end up ABD, and the more often that happens throughout the process, the more likely it is that you are at risk for becoming ABD when you have major holdups like that, because then it's really easy to let life get in the way and let it get away from you. But a lot of times the confusion comes from, again, not having a plan and a process to follow. And a lot of times what happens is that people will not, their process will be confusing for them because they aren't starting at the right starting point and they don't know which chapter to write first. And they realize that they'll start in one place and be stuck there for a good 6 months or so, and then realize they should have started somewhere else. So I wanted to address the question of, where do you start? What order should you write the chapters and why? And how do you deal with this? I mean, what do you do if you've gotten off track? So I'm going to talk about, there's other formats for a dissertation, but the most common is the 5-chapter format, which has the introduction as chapter 1, which is the theoretical framework, background, and definitions, and also the statement of the problem. And then the chapter 2 is the lit review, which dives deeper into what that problem statement is and reviews all the literature related to that topic and funnels down to the research question. Then chapter 3, which would be the methodology. Then chapter 4, which is the results, which you would write after collecting your data. And then chapter 5, which is the discussion and conclusions. So if you're following that 5-chapter format, the actual starting point is a little bit counterintuitive. So a lot of people would assume that you should start with chapter 1, which would be your background, your theoretical framework, your definitions and terms, and things like that. But actually, many universities will have you start at chapter 2. And having written both a thesis and a dissertation from a university that told me to start with chapter 2, I will say that it makes it significantly easier to do it this way. And if you have the option to start with chapter 2, I would highly recommend doing that. And if you are at a university that wants you to start with another chapter, I would highly recommend at least having an outline fleshed out, or having a solid idea of what literature is going to go into your chapter 2, and at least have it formatted somewhat so you know what's going to go in there before you actually write the chapter that needs to come first based on your university. So if you have a choice in the matter, write write chapter 2 first, but if not, at least know what's going to go in there so that you can use that information and that knowledge to inform the other chapters. And so what typically, and what I did, which worked really well, and what a lot of my clients and other graduate students that I've worked with have done is that they'll go chapter 2, chapter 1, chapter 3, and then they'll get the proposal ready, and then they will defend it. And then once they defend it and pass it, they'll collect their data, and then they'll do chapters 4 and 5. And chapters 4 and 5 can go pretty quickly. Once you get those results outlined, then you write your discussion. That can go a lot more smoothly than the first 3 chapters. Sometimes people will vary whether or not they do chapter 3 or chapter 1 first. So there is some flexibility in there with that. But generally speaking, if it's a lot easier to do chapter 2 first. And the reason why is that some of the information that you need to dig into in order to include, to know what to include in chapters 1 or 3 actually is what you flesh out in your lit review. So for example, a lot of times when you're writing your chapter 1, what you're doing is you're prepping the reader for some of the terminology, the theories that you're going to be talking about when you're figuring out what research studies to include. You're also talking about, again, the problem, like why is this a problem and why do we need to do more research? And it's really hard to know that information if you haven't already gone through and reviewed the literature. So while it's possible to be reading articles and outlining before you actually write the chapter 2, like if you do write chapter 1 first, the problem is that when you're actually writing your chapter 2, you get a really, really in-depth understanding of what that literature is, and you get a really in-depth understanding of those theoretical frameworks, those necessary terms, and the statement of the problem, which is what goes in chapter 1. So it's just that much more solid when you're actually doing chapter 2 first. So that is why a lot of people that come to me, if they've been stuck on chapter 1 for a while, a lot of times it's because they haven't reviewed the literature yet. So they don't have a context for what that theoretical framework and that problem statement needs to be. And it's because they haven't really had a game plan for tackling their chapter 2. So that is why a lot of people get stuck. And that is why it actually makes more sense to do that chapter 2 first. Now, I know some universities will want you to do your methods section first. And so that, again, you want to have a solid understanding of what research is out there, because you're not going to know what question to ask if you don't know what the literature says. And in order to know what your methods are, and you've got to figure out what question you're asking. So you won't be able to figure out how you're going to answer the question if you don't know what question you want to answer to begin with. So that's why you at least need to have some idea of what the literature says before you even write the methods section. And same thing applies if you do have a university that says, well, you know what, you need to write your methods first. You want to have a solid understanding of the literature out there and have reviewed the literature and have somewhat of an outline before you even figure out, okay, how am I going to actually answer that question? Because really the lit review and the chapter 1 are the what, and then the methods is the how. And it's hard to figure out the how before you know the what and the why, which is in those first 2 chapters. Really the statement of the problem is, why are we even looking at this to begin with? So again, the way that I did it was chapter 2, then chapter 1, and then chapter 3, and then collect data, then 4 and 5. So really the only thing that switched around is that I wrote the chapter 2 first, but I will tell you that a lot of people do get stuck on this proposal stage and they feel like they're kind of in this endless rabbit hole. Well, if you start with a lit review and if you start with a solid review of the research that's already out there, the rabbit hole doesn't get quite as out of control, and you can move through your chapter 1 and 3 a lot more smoothly if you do have a solid understanding of what's out there. Another thing about doing the methods section after you have an idea of what literature is out there is that you will know what other types of research have been done. And while your study doesn't have to be a direct replication of that, sometimes that is actually a reason why you're going to be using the methods that you're using. So for example, maybe there's other research that's been done and there's been major limitations in all of the methods in those other studies. Well, you're going to talk about that in the lit review, and then that's going to inform how you actually do the study. Maybe there's been a question that's been asked within certain populations, but we don't know what the answer is over here with this other group of people. And so what you're doing when you're going through the lit review, you can use that as a framework for figuring out how you would do your study. So that's why that can be really helpful in guiding you through and really getting you through those first 3 chapters quickly, because what I have seen happen time and time again is that one of those major hurdles is that people will get stuck in those first 3 chapters. That's the bulk of the actual writing of the dissertation process. And so a lot of times people will get stuck in that section, and then they'll be stuck there for years and they won't actually have their data collected. And so what happens is that makes it even more overwhelming, because number one, they've got all this writing to do. And number two, they've also, what's also laying ahead of them is their data collection. So there's a lot of other logistical challenges that are lying ahead, and it can really cause a lot of anxiety. And when you get into that state of freak out, what happens is that it impairs your decision making. It can mess with your head. It can mess with your motivation. And then it can make it a lot harder to finish. So really what it is in your best interest to have a solid game plan for getting through that proposal as quickly as you can. Obviously, you don't want to rush it and do crappy work. But having said that, you do want a solid game plan and know that you're moving forward at a steady pace so that you know that you're going to get it done and stay on track, as opposed to being stuck at one stage for months or a year or more, because that's when it gets to the point where you're at risk for not finishing. And then what happens is that sadly, that is when people don't finish, and people end up having invested years of their lives, time and effort into finishing this degree. They've made a lot of sacrifices with their family. There's been times when, they've given up their evenings and weekends for years at a time, or they have had in the back of their mind that they should be writing this dissertation, and they're not doing it, and they're doing all these other things to put it off, but at the same time it's eating away at them inside, and they know it's there, and they know their time is running out. So if you are at that stage, if you are struggling to figure out a game plan for writing those first 3 chapters, and you are stuck at any stage of that proposal, and maybe you've been stuck there for a couple months and you're not really sure what you need to do to move forward, and you're starting to wonder if you're ever going to finish this degree, and if you've put all this time and energy into this degree and have nothing to show for it. So if you're at that stage and you're not sure what to do next, we would love to hop on a call with you. So how this works is that my team and I, we do have a program for doctoral students and master's level students who are doing a dissertation or a thesis, and we support you through that entire process. And so what we do on these calls, the main goals are, number one, of course, to get you clarity on the next steps. A lot of times just talking through this situation and having someone repeat it back to you and really just validate where you are right now and what you need to be doing to moving forward, and really pinpointing why you're not moving to the next step can provide massive clarity. And then obviously, once we do that, another thing that we'll consider is whether or not you would be a fit for our programs and services, and if it would make sense for us to work together. So how to sign up for one of these breakthrough sessions. Again, they last about 45 minutes to an hour. It takes us to really talk through your situation and get a good understanding of where you are and what you would need to move forward. So what we do is that you would just need to click on the scheduling link that I'm going to share in the comments below. Then you'll be taken to a scheduling page. You can pick a time that works for you. And then you will be directed to an application page, and you'll just need to fill out that application so we can get some background information so we can better serve you. And then my team or I will call you at the time of your appointment on the number you provided. So with all that being said, we would love to see if we could support you. So all you need to do is click on that scheduling link to sign up for a dissertation breakthrough session. Thanks so much for listening.